The radio crackled at 1,647 hours, and every soul on Bagram Airfield heard the words that would haunt them for days. Guardian Angel is down. All souls lost. I say again, Guardian Angel is down. No survivors. In the Tactical Operations Center, Senior Master Sergeant Frank Davis closed his eyes. 23 years in the Air Force, 12 of them coordinating pararescue operations in the worst places on Earth, and those words still cut through him like shrapnel. The massive screens on the wall showed a smoking crater in the Pesh River Valley, thermal imaging confirming what everyone already knew. The MH-60 Pave Hawk had been torn apart by an RPG somewhere in the steep walls of that godforsaken shooting gallery. The bird had carried 4 crew. 2 pilots, a flight engineer, and 1 combat rescue officer. Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez. Davis stared at the red blip that had been Guardian Angel's transponder, now replaced by a blinking lost indicator. Rodriguez had been 28 years old, 5 feet 6 inches tall, 145 pounds, soaking wet, and the most stubborn, technically brilliant pararescueman he'd ever seen. Even if half the command still couldn't bring themselves to call her one. 300 yards from that burning wreckage, Maya Rodriguez opened her eyes. The first thing she noticed was the sky. It was wrong. The azure blue of Afghan summer hung where the ground should be. Spinning slowly, streaked with black smoke that curled upward from somewhere she couldn't see. Her body felt like it belonged to someone else, a distant collection of bones and tissue that someone put through a blender and reassembled incorrectly. She tried to breathe. Pain exploded through her chest like a grenade detonating inside her ribcage. Broken ribs. Multiple. Left side. Her training cataloged the injury before her conscious mind could fully process it. Then she tried to move her left arm, and the world went white. When Maya's vision cleared, she was screaming into the dirt. Her face was pressed against rocky Afghan soil, her mouth full of dust and copper, and her left forearm was bent at an angle that no forearm should ever bend. She could see bone, white, jagged, protruding through torn flesh that was already turning purple. Compound fracture. Radius and ulna displaced. Somewhere in the distance, automatic weapons chattered. The sound was distinct, the higher-pitched crack of M4S answering the deeper bark of PKM fire. The SEALs, Wolfpack 6, the team they'd been orbiting to support. They were still fighting. Maya rolled onto her right side, and the movement nearly made her vomit. Her head pounded with the unmistakable pressure of concussion, her vision swimming in and out of focus. Blood ran down the side of her face from a gash somewhere in her hairline, warm and sticky, mixing with sweat and dust. She lay there for 7 seconds, breathing through the pain, forcing her scrambled brain to think. The helicopter had been hit. She remembered that much. The tail rotor disintegrating in a flash of orange and black, the airframe spinning, the pilot's voice screaming something about auto-rotation. They'd been doing 90 miles per hour when they hit the valley floor. 90 miles per hour into solid rock. She should be dead. The thought settled over her like a cold blanket. She should be dead. The Pave Hawk should have killed her on impact. The crash should have torn her apart. But somehow, impossibly, she'd been ejected, thrown clear, and now she was lying 300 yards from the wreckage, every bone in her body screaming, listening to American operators die in a firefight she couldn't reach. If that opening hooked you, trust me, this story only gets more intense. Subscribe now for more incredible true stories of courage and hit that notification bell. Now, let me take you back to where Maya Rodriguez's mission began. 14 hours before command declared her dead. Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan. 0315 hours. 12 hours before everything went to hell. The alert came in on Maya's pager at 3 a.m, but she was already awake. She'd been awake for the past 2 hours, lying on her bunk in the PJ barracks, staring at the plywood ceiling and listening to the distant rumble of C-17s on the runway. Sleep had become a luxury she could rarely afford, not because of the operational tempo, though that was relentless, but because of the dreams. The dreams always ended the same way. A village in Helmand province. A child's eyes. The wet sound of an IED detonating 15 feet away. And then the blood. So much blood that her hand still felt sticky when she woke up, even though 2 years had passed since that day. The pager's buzz was almost a relief. She rolled off the bunk and was pulling on her flight suit before her roommate, a male PJ named Torres who'd been in country for 8 months, even stirred. The darkness of the barracks was absolute, the only light coming from the red glow of emergency exit signs. But Maya moved with practiced efficiency. Flight suit, boots, trauma shears in the right cargo pocket, headlamp around her neck. She was out the door in 90 seconds, jogging toward the TOC with her gear bag bouncing against her hip. The tactical operations center was chaos when she arrived, but it was organized chaos, the kind that only came from years of practice. Banks of monitors showed satellite imagery, live drone feeds, and a constantly updating common operating picture that tracked every American asset within 100 kilometers. Junior officers manned radio stations, their voices overlapping in the controlled murmur of military communication. Senior Master Sergeant Davis was waiting for her at the briefing table. Rodriguez. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Wolfpack 6 got inserted 18 hours ago into the Pesh River Valley. Sniper Overwatch mission. They're hunting a Taliban commander named Mullah Nasir Haqqani. High-value target. Tier 1 priority. Intel says Haqqani's moving through the valley tonight, trying to link up with fighters crossing from Pakistan. Maya studied the map he'd spread across the table. The Pesh River Valley was a nightmare. A narrow corridor of vertical rock walls, steep ridgelines, and dense vegetation that offered perfect cover for ambush. The terrain elevation numbers made her stomach tighten. The valley floor sat at 3,200 feet, but the surrounding peaks climbed over 8,000 feet in some places. That meant the SEALs were operating in a natural kill box, surrounded on all sides by elevated positions that could rain fire down on them from multiple angles. Call sign Wolfpack 6. Davis continued, tapping the map. 8 operators, plus their Afghan partner force element. They established an observation position here at Grid November Victor 3847, overlooking the primary route through the valley. Intel confidence is high that Haqqani will move through within the next 12 to 24 hours. And our role, Maya asked, though she already knew the answer, Guardian Angel support. You'll be orbiting at 3 clicks out, Grid November Victor 3724, ready to insert for immediate casualty evacuation if the mission goes hot. Standard crew, 2 pilots, flight engineer, and U.S. primary PJ. Doc Miller was supposed to be your backup, but he's down with a stomach bug that's got half the flight line puking their guts out. Maya absorbed this without comment. Flying solo meant she'd be the only medical asset on the helicopter if things went sideways. No backup, no second set of hands. Just her kit, and whatever hell the universe decided to throw at them. Weather, she asked. Clear skies, but it's going to be hot as Satan's armpit by midday. Forecast has the valley hitting 115 by noon. Thermals are going to be brutal, and density altitude will be pushing our power margins. Davis paused, his weathered face unreadable. Command wants you airborne by 0430. Wolfpack's primary extraction window is set for 1,800 hours, but if Haqqani shows up early, things could move fast. Maya nodded, already running calculations in her head. 14 hours of potential station time. Fuel would be an issue. They'd need at least 1 aerial refueling, maybe 2. And if the SEALs got into a firefight in that terrain, extraction would be complicated. The valley walls limited helicopter approach corridors to a handful of predictable routes. Predictable routes meant predictable targets. Who's flying? She asked. Captain Reeves and Lieutenant Commander Vasquez. Reeves has 600 hours in the Pave Hawk. Vasquez is newer, but solid. Flight engineer is Sergeant Kowalski. You've worked with him before. She had. Kowalski was a barrel-chested 26-year-old from Chicago who'd done 3 deployments and had earned the quiet respect that came from keeping his head under fire. He didn't talk much, but when the bullets started flying, he worked the door gun like an extension of his own body. Any questions? Davis asked. Maya shook her head. There were always questions. There were always things that could go wrong, variables that couldn't be predicted, enemy actions that couldn't be anticipated. But asking those questions wouldn't change the mission. She'd learned that lesson a long time ago. Then get to the flight line. Briefing with the aircrew in 30 minutes. Maya turned to leave, but Davis's voice stopped her at the door. Rodriguez. She looked back. The senior master sergeant's face had softened slightly, the hard lines around his eyes betraying something that might have been concern. Be careful out there. That valley has eaten more than its share of good people. Maya held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once. I always am, senior. The walk to the flight line took her past a memorial wall. She didn't stop. She never stopped, but her eyes found the names anyway. Sergeant First Class Derek Martinez, Technical Sergeant James Wheeler, Staff Sergeant Nicole Peters. 3 of the 17 names she knew personally. 3 of the people she'd failed to save. The night air was still cool, the pre-dawn darkness softened only by the glow of runway lights and the occasional flash of vehicle headlights moving between hangars. Bagram never truly slept. The massive airfield was the nerve center of American operations in Afghanistan, and the rumble of aircraft engines formed a constant background hum that had become as familiar to Maya as her own heartbeat. She found the MH-60 Pave Hawk on the flight line, its rotors tied down against a night breeze, its dull gray airframe bristling with the sensors and weapons that made it the most capable combat search and rescue platform in the world. The helicopter was a beast, 15,000 pounds of sophisticated machinery designed for one purpose: to go into hell and bring people back. Captain Reeves and Lieutenant Commander Vasquez were already there, conducting their pre-flight checks with the methodical precision of experienced aviators. Reeves was a lanky Texan with a drawl that emerged whenever he was relaxed, which was rarely. Vasquez was shorter, darker, and had the intense focus of someone who knew that a single mistake at the wrong moment could kill everyone on board. Kowalski was checking the M240 door gun, his thick fingers moving over the weapon with practiced familiarity. Rodriguez. Reeves acknowledged her with a nod. You catch the brief? Wolfpack 6 in the Pesh. Guardian Angel support. Orbit at grid 3,724 until extraction or things go loud. That about sums it up. Reeves finished checking the cyclic and collective, then stepped back from the cockpit. Weather's going to be a factor by midday. Density altitude could push us close to our power limits if we have to do a high altitude insert. How close? Maya asked. Close enough that I'm not going to enjoy it. We'll be pulling max power just to maintain hover at some of those elevation points. If we take damage or lose an engine, our options get real limited real fast. This was the calculus of combat aviation, the constant weighing of risk versus mission, of crew safety versus the lives of the operators on the ground. Maya understood it viscerally. Every flight was a bet, and sometimes a house one. Any word on Wolfpack status? She asked. Last check-in was at 0200. They're in position, no enemy contact yet. The Afghan partner force is holding the perimeter, while the SEALs maintain overwatch. So far, so quiet. So far, so quiet. The words hung in the air like a premonition. Maya stowed her gear in the aircraft, checking and rechecking her medical kit with the obsessive attention to detail that had kept her alive through 3 deployments. The kit was her life. 2 liters of lactated ringer solution. A surgical kit with hemostats, scalpels, and suture material. Chest seals, both standard and improvised. Combat gauze impregnated with kaolin to promote rapid clotting. Tourniquets, morphine auto-injectors. Ketamine, the tools to save a life or, when saving was impossible, to ease the transition from this world to whatever came next. She knew every item by touch. In the chaos of a firefight, with blood on her hands and bullets cracking overhead, she wouldn't have time to look. Everything had to be automatic, muscle memory built through thousands of repetitions. The pre-flight briefing was thorough but quick. Reeves walked them through the mission profile. Takeoff at 0430, transit to the Pesh River Valley, establish orbit 3 kilometers east of Wolfpack's position, maintain station until extraction or emergency. Communication protocols were confirmed. Emergency procedures reviewed, abort criteria established. Then they waited. The MH-60 lifted off at exactly 0432, its rotors biting into the cool Afghan air with a rhythmic thump that Maya felt in her chest. She sat in the cabin, her medical kit secured beside her, her eyes watching the darkness beyond the open door. Bagram fell away beneath them, the lights of the base shrinking to a cluster of orange dots against the black landscape. The transit took 47 minutes. Maya spent it in silence, her mind running through scenarios. Gunshot wounds, blast injuries, burns, fractures, hemorrhagic shock. Each possibility had a response, a protocol, a sequence of actions that could mean the difference between life and death. She rehearsed them all, her lips moving slightly as she talked herself through the steps. The Pesh River Valley materialized in the darkness like a jagged scar on the earth. The sun was just beginning to lighten the eastern horizon, casting the valley's steep walls in shades of purple and gray. Below, the river itself was invisible, hidden beneath a canopy of vegetation that followed its course through the terrain. Establishing orbit, Reeves announced over the intercom, Grid November Victor 3724, 3 clicks east of Wolfpack's position. Maya felt the helicopter bank gently as it settled into its holding pattern. Through the door, she could see the valley stretching away beneath them, its ridgelines and rock formations painted in the early morning light. It was beautiful, in a savage way, the kind of beauty that could kill you if you let yourself forget where you were. The hours passed slowly. By 0800, the sun had climbed high enough to turn the valley into an oven. The heat shimmered off the rock faces, distorting the air and making the terrain seem to breathe. Inside the helicopter, the temperature climbed despite the wind from the open doors. Maya felt sweat soaking through her flight suit, collecting in the small of her back and under her arms. Wolfpack, this is Guardian Angel. Radio check, over. The response came back scratchy but clear. Guardian Angel, Wolfpack 6. We read you 5 by 5. No contact. Still waiting on our target. How copy? Copy that, Wolfpack. We're maintaining station. Guardian Angel out. More hours. The sun reached its zenith and began its slow descent toward the western peaks. The heat became oppressive, the kind that made it hard to think, hard to stay focused. Maya forced herself to drink water at regular intervals, knowing that dehydration could kill as surely as any bullet. At 14:30, Kowalski passed her an MRE, meal ready to eat, the infamous field rations that kept soldiers alive but rarely happy. She choked down the processed beef patty and crackers without tasting them, her attention still focused on the valley below. At 15:02, everything changed. Guardian Angel, this is Wolfpack 6. The voice on the radio was no longer calm. It was tight with adrenaline, words tumbling over each other. We are in contact. I say again, we are in contact. Enemy force, estimated 40 plus fighters, engaged from multiple positions, taking heavy fire. Maya's body went rigid. The relaxed monotony of the past 10 hours evaporated in an instant, replaced by the razor-sharp focus that came with imminent action. Wolfpack 6, Guardian Angel copies. Reeves replied, his drawl completely gone now. What's your situation? Enemy is dug in on the ridgeline above us. They hit the Afghan partner force first. We got 3 casualties, 1 critical. We're pinned down and taking accurate sniper fire. Request immediate support. In the cockpit, Reeves and Vasquez exchanged glances. The mission profile was clear. They were supposed to maintain orbit, stay out of the kill zone, and only enter for extraction. But the desperation in the SEAL's voice painted a different picture. Wolfpack, what's the status of your critical casualty? Maya cut in, GSW to the chest. Through and through right side. He's conscious but declining. We got a chest seal on him, but he needs a higher level of care than we can provide out here. Maya looked at Reeves through the open cockpit door. Their eyes met, and in that moment, she saw the same calculation she was making. The valley was a death trap. Entering it meant exposing a helicopter to the same fire that was pinning the SEALs. But staying out meant watching good men die on the ground. How far to their position? Maya asked. 3 clicks through hostile terrain. Reeves replied, we'd be entering a box canyon with limited maneuverability. RPGs could engage us from at least 6 different elevated positions. And if we don't go? The question hung in the air. Both of them knew the answer. If they didn't go, the wounded SEAL would likely die. Others might follow. The extraction window at 1800 was still 3.5 hours away, an eternity when you were bleeding out on a mountainside. Guardian Angel, this is Wolfpack 6. Where the hell are you? Reeves keyed the radio. Wolfpack, Guardian Angel is 3 clicks east. We're assessing ingress options. Stand by. We don't have time to stand by. We've got RPG teams moving to cut off our withdrawal route. If you don't come now, we won't be here when you arrive. Maya grabbed her medical kit, checking the straps that held it to her body. I can stabilize him if we can get close enough, she said. I've done field thoracotomies under worse conditions. But we need to move now. Reeves stared at her for a long moment. His jaw was tight, the muscles in his neck corded with tension. She could see the war playing out behind his eyes. Duty versus safety, protocol versus humanity. Then he turned back to the controls. Vasquez, prepare for combat ingress. Kowalski, hot on the gun. We're going in. The helicopter banked hard. Its nose dropping as Reeves pushed the collective forward and poured power into the rotors. The valley wall seemed to rush toward them, the narrow corridor between the ridgeline swallowing the aircraft like a serpent's throat. Maya braced herself against the airframe, her heart hammering in her chest. Through the door, she could see the terrain streaking past, rock faces and scrub brush and the occasional flash of the river far below. The sound of the rotors changed, becoming deeper and more urgent as the helicopter fought against the thermals rising from the sun-baked stone. 1 click out. Vasquez called, I'm picking up muzzle flashes on the northern ridge. Multiple positions. Roger. Kowalski, engage targets of opportunity. The M240 erupted beside Maya, the deafening roar of the gun drowning out everything else. Spent brass cascaded across the cabin floor, hot enough to burn through cloth. She could see tracers reaching up toward the ridgeline, answered by the winking flashes of return fire. Half a click. I've got visual on Wolfpack's position. They're in depression on the valley floor, partial cover from a rock outcropping. I see them, starting my approach. The RPG came from nowhere. Maya never saw the launch, just a streak of fire that crossed her vision like a lightning bolt, followed by an explosion that slammed her against a bulkhead with enough force to drive the breath from her lungs. The helicopter lurched violently, the cabin filling with smoke and the shriek of tortured metal. Tail rotors gone. Vasquez screamed, We're going in. The world became chaos. The MH-60 spun, its airframe rotating wildly as it lost the counter-torque that kept it stable. Through the smoke and confusion, Maya caught glimpses of sky and ground trading places in a nauseating spiral. She heard Reeves shouting something about auto-rotation, heard Kowalski's voice cut short, heard the wind screaming through the open doors. Then impact. The helicopter hit the ground at 90 miles per hour, and Maya's world ended. The airframe crumpled like aluminum foil, absorbing energy that should have killed everyone inside instantly. It tumbled, rolled, cartwheeled across the rocky valley floor, shedding pieces of itself with each impact. Metal screamed. Glass shattered. Fire erupted from somewhere near the engines. Maya was thrown free. She didn't feel the ejection. Her body was simply there, inside the helicopter, and then it wasn't. She hit the ground hard, rolling across rock and gravel, her arms and legs flailing uselessly against forces far beyond her control. Something cracked in her chest, ribs, she would realize later, and something else broke in her arm with a wet snap that she heard even over the roar of the crash. Then silence. Not true silence. The crackling of flames, the distant chatter of gunfire, the ringing in her ears that came from traumatic acoustic injury. But the helicopter was no longer moving. The world was no longer spinning. She was lying on her back, staring at an Afghan sky that shouldn't exist, with a body that felt like it had been dismantled and reassembled by someone who didn't have a manual. And somewhere in that silence, a radio crackled. Guardian Angel is down. All souls lost. I say again, Guardian Angel is down. No survivors. The words filtered through Maya's shattered consciousness like water through sand. All souls lost. No survivors. They meant Reeves. They meant Vasquez. They meant Kowalski. They meant her. Command had declared her dead. She turned her head, the movement sending spikes of agony through her neck, and saw the wreckage of the Pave Hawk 300 yards away. It was burning, black smoke pouring into blue sky, flames licking at what remained of the airframe. Nothing moved in that inferno. No one was coming out. Reeves, Vasquez, Kowalski, her crew, Her friends. Gone. The grief hit her like a physical blow, tightening her already broken chest until she couldn't breathe. Tears mixed with the blood on her face, cutting tracks through the dirt and ash. She wanted to scream, to rage against a universe that had taken everything from her in the space of 30 seconds. But screaming took air, and air meant pain, and pain was already overwhelming. So she lay there, staring at the burning helicopter, listening to the gunfire that still echoed through the valley. The SEALs were still fighting. She could hear the distinct crack of M4S, fewer now than before, but still active. The Taliban hadn't overrun them yet. The Taliban hadn't won yet. Something stirred in Maya's chest that wasn't broken ribs. It was anger. Pure, crystalline anger that burned hotter than the flames consuming the Pave Hawk. She'd lost her crew. She'd lost her aircraft. Command had written her off, added her name to the growing list of those who'd given everything in this endless war. But she wasn't dead. She wasn't dead, and there were Americans fighting 300 yards away, and she was the only one who could help them. Maya rolled onto her right side, screaming into the dirt as her broken ribs ground against each other. The pain was transcendent, a white-hot symphony of nerve endings that threatened to drag her into unconsciousness. But she'd trained for pain. She'd been taught to compartmentalize it, to acknowledge its existence without letting control her actions. She looked at her left arm. The compound fracture was worse than she'd initially assessed. Both bones, radius and ulna, had shattered approximately 4 inches above the wrist, and a jagged end protruded through torn flesh that was already purpling with contusion. Blood seeped from the wound, dark and arterial, pooling on the rocky ground beneath her. She needed to stabilize it. Now, Maya's medical kit was still strapped to her body, miracle of miracles, though the straps had loosened during the ejection. She reached across with her right hand, fingers clumsy with shock and adrenaline, and managed to unzip the main compartment. Combat gauze, morphine auto-injector, elastic bandage, SAM splint. The SAM splint was her salvation. Aluminum and foam, malleable enough to be shaped with one hand, rigid enough to immobilize a fracture. She'd practiced this drill 100 times in training, self-aid for catastrophic injury. But she'd never done it with a real compound fracture while concussed and bleeding out in a combat zone. First the morphine. She grabbed the auto-injector with her teeth, bit off the safety cap, and slammed it into her thigh. The drug hit her system within seconds, taking the edge off the pain without eliminating it entirely. She needed to think clearly, and too much morphine would cloud her judgment. Then the wound. She packed combat gauze around protruding bone, wincing as the kaolin-impregnated material pressed against raw tissue. The bleeding slowed but didn't stop entirely. She'd deal with that later, if there was a later. Finally, the splint. She bent the SAM splint into a rough U shape, positioned it under her forearm, and secured it with elastic bandage wrapped as tightly as she could manage with one hand. It wasn't pretty. Any instructor would have torn it apart in training. But it would hold. The arm was immobilized. She could move without the bone ends grinding against each other. The whole process took 7 minutes. 7 minutes of her life that she'd never get back. 7 minutes of agony that nearly broke her. But when she was done, she could stand. Sort of. Maya pushed herself up with her right arm, swaying as the world tilted and spun. The concussion made everything unstable, like try to balance on a ship in a storm. She took a step, nearly fell, caught herself, took another. The gunfire was louder now. She was moving toward it, toward the SEALs, toward the mission that Command had written off along with her life. 300 yards had never seemed so far. She moved in a half-crouch, using the rocky terrain for cover, her breath coming in short gasps that sent fire through her broken ribs with every inhalation. Blood dripped from her hairline into her eyes, and she wiped it away impatiently, leaving smears of red across her face. Her left arm hung useless at her side, the splint holding it stable, but the limb itself effectively dead weight. The valley floor was chaos. She could see Taliban fighters moving on the ridgeline above. Dark shapes against the skyline, muzzle flashes marking their positions. Below, in a shallow depression surrounded by a natural rock wall, the SEALs had established a defensive perimeter. She counted 6 figures still fighting, weapons up, returning fire with the disciplined precision that came from thousands of hours of training. 6. There had been 8 SEALs in the team, plus the Afghan partner force, which meant at least 2 were down, possibly more. Maya covered the first 100 yards in 3 minutes, moving from boulder to boulder, using the terrain like the tactical puzzle it was. Every step sent shockwaves through her broken body. Every breath was a battle against the pain that wanted to shut her down. But she kept moving, kept pushing, kept telling herself that stopping meant death. Not just hers, but the men fighting in that depression. At the 200-yard mark, she had to stop. Her vision was graying at the edges, the concussion reasserting itself with a vengeance. She pressed her back against a rock, closed her eyes, and focused on breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow, controlled. The technique she'd learned in SEER school, designed to manage panic and conserve energy. The gunfire intensified. She heard the distinctive crumble of a grenade, followed by a scream that cut through the air like a knife. Someone was hit. Someone else was dying. Maya opened her eyes and pushed herself back to her feet. The final 100 yards took an eternity. She was exposed to the last 30 meters, a gap in the terrain that offered no cover, no protection from the bullets that whined through the air around her. She ran or tried to run, her broken body propelling itself forward through sheer force of will. Rounds kicked up dirt at her feet, cracked past her head, ricocheted off rocks with angry screams of metal. And then she was there. She dove into depression, landing hard on her right side, the impact sending fresh waves of agony through her chest. A SEAL turned toward her, weapon raised, and she saw recognition flash across his face, followed immediately by confusion. "What the Rodriguez? You're alive?" The voice belonged to Chief Petty Officer Ryan Mitchell, the team's senior NCO. His face was blackened with smoke and grime, his tactical vest streaked with blood that might have been his own or might have belonged to someone else. Behind him, the rest of the team was arrayed in a loose circle, weapons pointing outward, every man focused on the threat surrounding them. "I'm alive," Maya managed, her voice barely more than a croak. "Where are your wounded?" Mitchell stared at her for a moment, taking the splintered arm, the blood-soaked face, the obvious concussion, and then shook his head slowly. "You look like you should be one of my wounded. Where are they?" Maya repeated. Mitchell jerked his thumb toward the center of the depression. "Too critical." Anderson took a round to the chest, through and through right side, collapsed lung. "Parker's got a femoral bleed from a ricochet. We've got tourniquets on him, but he's lost a lot of blood. And Sergeant Ahmadi from the Afghan force is dead. Enemy got him in the initial ambush." Maya was already moving toward the wounded, her medical training overriding the screaming protests of her own body. She could see them now. 2 operators lie in the dirt. Their teammates try to provide care with the limited resources available. Anderson was unconscious, his breathing shallow and rapid, the classic signs of tension pneumothorax developing. The chest seal his teammates had applied was good work. It had prevented air from entering the chest cavity, but it was also trapping air that had no way to escape. His lung was being crushed by increasing pressure. Parker was awake, which was worse. His face was gray, his lips tinged with blue, and his eyes held the glassy stare of a man who knew he was dying. The tourniquet on his upper thigh was tight. Too tight, possibly, but the wound beneath it was still weeping blood. The femoral artery might be partially severed, requiring constant pressure that the tourniquet alone couldn't provide. Maya dropped beside Anderson first. The pneumothorax would kill him faster. "I need a 14-gauge needle," she said, more to herself than anyone else. Her medical kit was still intact, still strapped to her body. She fumbled it open with her one good hand, her fingers finding the catheter by touch. "What are you doing?" Mitchell crouched beside her, his weapon temporarily lowered. "Needle decompression. He's got a tension pneumo. If I don't relieve the pressure, his heart's going to stop in about 5 minutes." She didn't wait for a response. Her right hand found the landmark, second intercostal space, midclavicular line, and she drove the needle home. The hiss of escaping air was immediate and dramatic, and Anderson's breathing eased almost instantly. He wasn't out of danger. He needed a chest tube, needed surgery, needed things she couldn't provide in a firefight, but he was stable. For now. "Jesus Christ," Mitchell breathed. Maya was already moving to Parker. The femoral bleed was worse than she'd expected. The tourniquet had slowed the hemorrhage, but it hadn't stopped it completely. Blood was pooling beneath his leg, dark and thick, more than any human could afford to lose. "How long has the tourniquet been on?" she demanded. 20 minutes, maybe 30. One of the other SEALs answered. "We've tightened it twice, but it keeps bleeding through." Maya examined the wound, her trained eyes picking out details that others might miss. The bullet had entered the medial thigh, just below the inguinal crease, and had either grazed or partially transected the femoral artery. The tourniquet was positioned correctly, but the wound's location was too proximal, too close to the groin, for the tourniquet to achieve complete occlusion. She needed to pack it directly. "Combat gauze," she said, pulling the rolled dressing from her kit. "Hold him down. This is going to hurt." Parker's eyes found hers, and she saw understanding there. He knew what was coming. He nodded once, then bit down on the leather strap someone pressed between his teeth. Maya drove her fingers into the wound. Parker screamed, his body arching against the hands that held him down. Maya ignored it, her entire focus on the bloody channel her fingers were exploring. She could feel the artery, pulsing damage, the torn edges separating with each heartbeat. She packed the combat gauze directly against the tear, pressing with all the force she could generate. Feeling the bleeding slow as the kaolin activated and began to form a clot. "More pressure," she ordered, and hands joined hers, pushing the gauze deeper into the wound until it felt like they were trying to push their fingers through to the other side of his leg. The bleeding stopped. Parker went limp, consciousness abandoning him as the pain overwhelmed his system. But he was alive. His pulse was weak but present, his breathing shallow but steady. He would need a transfusion, needed to be in surgery within 2 hours. But for now, for right now, he was going to make it. Maya sat back on her heels, her right hand covered in blood up to the elbow, her body trembling with exhaustion and pain. The gunfire hadn't stopped. If anything, it had intensified while she worked. The Taliban were pushing closer, emboldened by the helicopter crash. Sensing blood in the water. "We need to move," Mitchell said, his voice tight. "They're flanking us. Another 10 minutes. They'll have this position bracketed with enfilading fire." "Move where?" Another SEAL demanded. "We're surrounded. Extraction's been called off. That was our ride burning on the valley floor." Maya looked toward the smoke, still rising from the Pavehawk wreckage. Command thought she was dead. Command thought the helicopter was destroyed. The crew lost. The mission over. No one was coming to help them. No one even knew they were still alive. "Base," she said. The word came out hoarse, forced through a throat raw with dust and smoke. We moved toward base. Mitchell stared at her. Base is 14 kilometers away, through hostile terrain, at night, with 2 critical casualties who can't walk. Then we carry them. That's insane. He gestured at her broken arm, her bloody face, the obvious injuries that should have left her unconscious or dead. "You're barely standing. And you want to carry 2 200-pound men 14 clicks through Taliban-controlled territory." Maya met his eyes. "I want to get your men home. That's what I want. That's why I'm here. That's why I didn't stay down when that helicopter threw me 200 yards across a valley floor." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You can stay here and wait for the Taliban to overrun this position, or you can trust me to get us out. Your choice, Chief." The silence stretched between them, punctuated by gunfire and the shouts of Taliban fighters maneuvering on the ridgeline. Mitchell's jaw worked, the muscles in his face tight with conflicting emotions. She could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, weighing her injuries against her determination, her physical state against her obvious competence. "You just saved 2 of my men's lives," he said finally, "with one arm and what looks like a grade 3 concussion. Against my better judgment, I'm inclined to believe you might pull this off." "Not might," Maya said. "Will. But we need to move now, before they complete the encirclement." The next 30 minutes were organized chaos. The SEALs worked with quiet efficiency, redistributing ammunition, destroying sensitive equipment that couldn't be carried, and preparing the wounded for transport. Anderson was strapped to an improvised litter, 2 rifles and a tarp, crude but functional. while Parker was secured to a second litter made from a tactical stretcher one of the SEALs had been carrying. Maya had treated her own injuries while they worked. She repacked the wound around her compound fracture, adding more combat gauze and tightening the bandage until the bleeding stopped completely. She couldn't do anything about the broken ribs or the concussion. Those would have to wait until they reached safety. But she swallowed 2 more ibuprofen and forced her body to keep functioning through sheer stubbornness. Movement plan, Mitchell said, gathering the remaining operators around a map spread on the ground. 14 kilometers to the nearest friendly position. That's the combat outpost at Grid November Victor 2890. We can call for extraction from there. Route? One of the SEALs asked. Follow the valley floor for 3 clicks, then cut south through this ridgeline gap. Mitchell traced the path with his finger. Terrain's rough, but it gives us cover from the elevated positions. We move at night. NVG's on tactical spacing, security element leading and trailing. What about the wounded? 4-man rotation on each litter. 20-minute shifts. Anyone who's not carrying is pulling security. Mitchell looked at Maya. That includes you, Rodriguez. I know you want to monitor them, but you're no good to us if you collapse from exhaustion halfway through. Maya opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. He was right. She was running on adrenaline and morphine, her body burning through reserves it didn't have. If she pushed too hard, she'd crash, and then she'd be another casualty they had to carry. Fine, she said, but I need to be close enough to intervene if their conditions change. You'll be in the center with the litters, close enough to touch them if needed. The breakout began at 1723, as the sun started its descent toward the western peaks, and the shadows lengthened across the valley floor. The SEALs moved with the fluid precision of men who'd trained together for years, their weapons up, their movements synchronized. Maya stayed in the center of the formation, her one good hand resting on her sidearm, her eyes constantly moving between the wounded operators on the litters. The Taliban knew they were moving. Within the first 15 minutes, sporadic gunfire began reaching toward them from the ridgeline above. The rounds were inaccurate, the range was long and the angle difficult. But they forced the group to move faster, to stay lower, to accept additional risk in exchange for speed. Contact left, someone shouted, and the formation shifted instantly, weapons pivoting toward cluster fighters who'd appeared on a rocky outcropping 200 meters away. The firefight was brief but intense. Muzzle flashes lit up the gathering darkness, tracers crisscrossing in deadly patterns, the sound of gunfire echoing off the valley walls. 2 Taliban fighters fell. The rest retreated into the rocks. The SEALs kept moving, barely breaking stride. Parker's pressure's dropping, Maya reported, her fingers on the wounded operator's carotid pulse. Heart rate 120, breathing rapid and shallow. He's going into compensated shock. What do you need? Fluids. For access. She was already pulling the supplies from her kit, her one hand working with desperate efficiency. Someone hold this arm. I need to find a vein. One of the SEALs dropped beside her, securing Parker's arm against his chest while Maya prepped the forecatheter. Finding a vein on a hypovolemic patient was difficult under the best circumstances. Doing it on a bouncing litter, in fading light, with one hand, was nearly impossible. She found one anyway, a small tributary in the antecubital fossa, barely visible beneath Parker's ashen skin. She slid the needle home on the first try, secured the catheter, and connected the bag of lactated ringer solution that she'd been saving for exactly this moment. Keep this elevated, she ordered, shoving the bag into the SEAL's hands. Squeeze it every 30 seconds to push fluids. We need to get his volume up or he's going to code. The kilometers crawled past. Darkness fell completely, and the world transformed into the green-tinted unreality of night vision. Maya's NVGs were damaged, one lens cracked, the other functional but flickering intermittently. But she could see well enough to keep moving. The terrain was brutal. Loose rock that twisted ankles, steep grades that turned every step into an exhausting climb, and vegetation that grabbed at clothing and equipment like skeletal fingers. At the 4-kilometer mark, Anderson regained consciousness. His eyes fluttered open, and Maya saw confusion there, followed by pain, followed by the dawning realization of where he was and what had happened. Don't move, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've got a collapsed lung. I decompressed in the field, but you need to stay as still as possible." Anderson's lips moved, but no sound came out. She leaned closer. "Hurts. I know. I'm sorry. I gave you everything I could, but I'm running low on morphine. Just try to breathe. Slow and shallow. We're going to get you home." Home. The word felt hollow, ridiculous. Home was 14,000 miles away, a small apartment in San Antonio with a cactus on the windowsill that was probably dead by now. Home was her mother's voice on a crackling phone line, asking if she was safe, asking when she'd be coming back. But for Anderson, home was survival. Home was getting off this mountain alive, making it to a hospital, seeing his family again. Maya could give him that. She would give him that, or she'd die trying. At the 6-kilometer mark, they hit trouble. Contact front, multiple hostiles, 50 meters, blocking the pass. The formation froze. Maya pressed herself against a boulder, her heart hammering, her damaged NVG struggling to make sense of the scene ahead. The ridgeline gap that Mitchell had planned to use as their route south was occupied. She could see them now. Dark shapes moving among the rocks, setting up what looked like a machine gun position overlooking the approach. The Taliban had anticipated their movement, had cut them off. Options. Mitchell breathed beside her. "We can't go through. That machine gun will tear us apart. We can't go around. The terrain's impassable on both flanks. Then we make the move." Maya's mind was racing, the tactical problem overlaying itself on everything she knew about combat, about terrain, about human psychology. Smoke and thermite. Create a diversion. Make them think we're attacking from one direction, then slip past while they're repositioning. Mitchell considered this for approximately 3 seconds. "Do it." Maya crawled forward, staying low, her movements agonizingly slow as she worked her way toward a position that would give her the angle she needed. Every inch sent fresh pain through her broken body, but she kept moving, kept pushing, kept telling herself that this was the moment that mattered. The smoke grenade were attached to her vest. 2 of them, standard M18S, yellow and violet. The thermite was in her cargo pocket, a single and M14 incendiary grenade that she'd been carrying for emergency equipment destruction. She found her spot behind a cluster of rocks, 30 meters from the Taliban position. Through her flickering NVGs, she could see the fighters clearly now. 7 men, armed with AKs and at least 1 PKM, their attention focused on the approach corridor where they expected the Americans to appear. Maya pulled the pin on the first smoke grenade and hurled it toward the left flank of the Taliban position. Purple smoke billowed instantly, thick and obscuring, turning that section of the ridgeline into an impenetrable cloud. Before the fighters could react, she threw the second grenade to the right, adding yellow smoke to the purple, creating an impression of a coordinated attack from multiple directions. The Taliban responded exactly as she'd hoped. Shouts echoed across the rocks, followed by the distinctive chatter of the PKM opening up on the smoke screen. The fighters repositioned, moving to address what they thought was an imminent assault, their attention focused away from the actual approach corridor. Now the thermite. Maya pulled the pin in through the incendiary grenade directly into the Taliban position. The effect was immediate and devastating. White phosphorus igniting at 3,000 degrees, melting rock and metal alike, sending the fighters scrambling in panic and confusion. "Go! Go! Go!" Maya screamed into her radio, and the SEALs surged forward, carrying the litters at a dead run, exploiting the chaos she created to push through the gap before the Taliban could recover. Gunfire erupted around them, wild, undisciplined, the confused shooting of men who didn't know where the real threat was coming from. Maya sprinted beside the litters, her broken ribs screaming, her lungs burning, her vision narrowing to a tunnel focus on the path ahead. They broke through. Behind them, the smoke was dispersing, the thermite fire dying down, and the Taliban were regrouping. But the SEALs had gained a crucial 200 meters, putting a rocky ridgeline between themselves and the pursuers, buying precious time to continue their desperate march toward safety. "Sound off," Mitchell called, and voices answered one by one. Alive, wounded, but alive. "Rodriguez." Maya was on her knees, gasping for breath, her vision graying at the edges. The sprint through the gap had cost her. She could feel her body shutting down, the accumulated trauma finally overwhelming her ability to compensate. I'm okay, she managed, though she knew the words were a lie. Keep moving. We need to put distance. You need to rest. I'll rest when we get there. She forced herself back to her feet, swaying, and felt a strong hand grip her right arm, stabilizing her, supporting her weight. Lean on me, Mitchell said. That's an order, Rodriguez. She didn't have the strength to argue. The next 4 kilometers blurred together in Maya's memory. She moved through a fog of pain and exhaustion, her feet operating on autopilot, while her mind drifted in and out of consciousness. She was vaguely aware of Mitchell beside her, his arm supporting her weight, his voice occasionally cutting through the haze to give orders or report their position. She was aware of the litters, of Parker and Anderson still alive on them, their condition stable thanks to the intervention she performed. She was aware of the darkness pressing in around them, the stars overhead impossibly bright against the Afghan sky, the sound of pursuit fading as they put more distance between themselves and the Taliban. At the 10-kilometer mark, Parker went into a rest. The call came from one of the SEALs carrying the rear litter. He's coding. Rodriguez, he's coding. And Maya was there before she fully realized she was moving. Her hands found Parker's chest, felt the absence of a heartbeat, and began compressions with a rhythm burned into her muscle memory by years of training. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She counted out loud, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her system. 30 compressions. Tilt the head. 2 breaths. Check for a pulse. Nothing. Come on, Parker. Come on. 30 more compressions. Her broken ribs ground against each other with every push. 2 more breaths. Check. Nothing. Don't you dare. Don't you dare die on me. 30 more. She felt something shift in her chest. A rib moving, separating, probably puncturing something important. She didn't care. 2 breaths. Check. A pulse. Weak. Thready but present. Parker's chest rose and fell on its own, his body remembering how to breathe without her forcing it. Maya collapsed beside the litter, her right hand still resting on his chest, her entire body trembling with exhaustion. He's back, she whispered. He's back. Keep moving. The combat outpost came into view at 2,147 hours. It was exactly as Maya remembered from a mission briefing. A small cluster building surrounded by HESCO barriers and concertina wire, perched on a ridgeline that offered commanding views of the surrounding terrain. The American flag hung limp in the windless air, illuminated by the harsh glare of spotlights. Civilization, safety, home, at least the closest thing to home she was going to find in this country. Slow down, Mitchell ordered. We approach in the open, weapons lowered, hands visible. Last thing we need is to get shot by our own people after all this. The SEALs complied, their formation loosening, their weapons dropping to low ready position. Maya stayed with the litters, her hands still on Parker's chest, monitoring his pulse with obsessive attention. The challenge came from the darkness ahead. Halt! Identify yourselves. Wolfpack 6. Mitchell called back. 8 personnel, 2 critical casualties. We need immediate case vac. There was a pause. Radio traffic. Probably someone verifying their identity, someone deciding whether to believe them, and then the gates swung open. Soldiers poured out, flashlights cutting to the darkness, voices overlapping control chaos. Medical personnel appeared beside the litters, hands reaching for the wounded, questions being fired at Maya faster than she could answer. She gave him the rundown, GSW to chest with needle decompression, femoral bleed with direct wound packing, for fluids running, cardiac arrest with successful CPR at the 10-kilometer mark, and watched as her patients were carried away toward the aid station. They would live, both of them. She'd done everything she could, given everything she had, and it had been enough. The thought was just forming in her exhausted mind when her legs gave out. Maya hit the ground hard, her vision tunneling to a point, her body finally surrendering to the accumulated trauma of the past 14 hours. She was dimly aware of hands catching her, voices shouting, someone calling for a stretcher, but the words didn't make sense anymore. Nothing made sense. She'd done it. She'd gotten them out. That was all that mattered. Darkness claimed her. She woke to fluorescent lights and the familiar beeping of cardiac monitors. The combat support hospital at Bagram was exactly as depressing as she remembered. White walls, industrial equipment. The smell of antiseptic that never quite managed to cover the smell of blood and fear. But it was safe. She was safe. Maya tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Her entire body screamed in protest, and she fell back against the pillow with a groan that she couldn't quite suppress. Easy. The voice came from beside her bed. You've been out for 18 hours. Your body's been through hell. She turned her head, slowly, carefully, and found Senior Master Sergeant Davis sitting in a chair beside her bed. His face was haggard, dark circles under his eyes. His uniform rumpled in a way that suggested he'd been wearing it for far too long. Rodriguez. His voice cracked slightly. We thought you were dead. Heard. The word came out as a croak. Her throat felt like sandpaper. Radio. All souls lost. Davis closed his eyes, his jaw tightening. When the Pave Hawk went down, the crash site was completely engulfed. Thermal imaging showed no survivors. We declared Ukiah at 1647. Your family was notified. Maya's heart lurched. Her mother, her sisters, they thought she was dead. For more than 12 hours, they'd been grieving her, mourning her, believing that she'd been killed in action on a mountainside in Afghanistan. Call them. She managed. Please. Already done. The moment you walked, he paused, correcting himself. The moment you were carried into the outpost, we got word back. Your mother knows you're alive. She's flying to Germany right now. Actually, they're evacuating you to Landstuhl as soon as you're stable enough to travel. The relief was overwhelming. Maya felt tears sliding down her cheeks, and she didn't bother trying to stop them. She was alive. Her family knew she was alive. The men she'd saved were alive. Parker and Anderson? Both in surgery. Parker needed a femoral artery repair. Your wound packing saved his life. The surgeon said if you hadn't done what you did in the field, he would have bled out within minutes. Anderson's getting a chest tube. Prognosis is good for both of them. Maya nodded, the movement sending fresh pain through her neck and shoulders. The rest of the team? Minor injuries. A few shrapnel wounds. Some burns. Everyone's walking. Considering what they went through, it's a miracle. Davis leaned forward, his eyes intense. 14 kilometers, Rodriguez. Through hostile terrain. At night, with 2 critical casualties and a compound fracture in your arm. How the hell did you do that? Didn't have a choice. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything she'd experienced. They needed me. I was the only one who could help. So I helped. Davis was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost gentle. You did more than help. Chief Mitchell submitted his after-action report an hour ago. He's recommending you for the Air Force Cross. The Air Force Cross. Second only to the Medal of Honor in the hierarchy of military valor awards. Maya had never expected to hear those words applied to her. I didn't do it for medals, she said. I know. Davis reached out and took her uninjured hand, squeezing gently. That's why you deserve one. The investigation took 3 days. They interviewed everyone. The SEALs, the combat outpost personnel, the medical staff who treated Parker and Anderson. They examined the crash site, recovering what remained of the Pave Hawk and its crew. They pieced together a timeline of events that began with a pre-dawn launch and ended with a bloodied pararescue medic walking into a combat outpost carrying 2 men who should have been dead. Reeves, Vasquez, Kowalski. Their bodies were recovered from the wreckage. All 3 had died on impact, their injuries too severe for survival. Maya learned this from Davis, who delivered the news with the careful gentleness of someone who understood exactly how much it would hurt. She'd known, of course. She'd known from the moment she saw the Pave Hawk burning that her crew was gone. But hearing it confirmed, hearing their names spoken in the past tense, hearing the details of how they died, broke something inside her that the physical injuries hadn't touched. She wept for them in the quiet darkness of the hospital at night, with no witnesses and no judgment. She let herself grieve for the men who died while she'd lived. She told herself that survivor's guilt was normal, expected, something that therapy could help address. She told herself that she'd done everything she could, that their deaths weren't her fault, that they would have wanted her to keep fighting. None of it helped, but she said the words anyway. On the fourth day, Mitchell came to see her. The SEAL chief looked better than the last time she'd seen him. Cleaned up, rested, the hard lines of exhaustion softened by 3 days of sleep and medical care. He walked into her hospital room with the quiet confidence that defined his kind and stood at the foot of her bed with something in his hand. "Rodriguez." He nodded once, the gesture conveying respect and acknowledgement in equal measure. "Chief Mitchell." She tried to sit up straighter, grimacing as her broken ribs protested. "Don't." He waved a hand. "Stay comfortable. This won't take long." He stepped closer, and Maya could see now what he was holding. A small box, wooden, with a clasp that gleamed in the fluorescent light. Her breath caught. "The SEAL teams don't give these out lightly," Mitchell said, opening the box to reveal what lay inside. "In fact, we almost never give them out at all. But the boys and I talked it over, and we agreed unanimously. After what you did for us, after what you sacrificed, there was no other choice." Inside the box was a SEAL trident, the golden insignia that identified its wearer as a member of the most elite Special Operations Force in the United States military. 367 men had earned the right to wear it since the teams were established in 1962. Maya would be the first non-SEAL to receive one as an honorary award. "I can't accept this," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't have a choice." Mitchell's face cracked into something that might have been a smile. "Anderson and Parker are alive because of you. Every man on that team is alive because you refused to quit when any sane person would have given up. You pulled us out of hell, Rodriguez. The least we can do is welcome you as one of our own." He set the box on her lap and took a step back, snapping to attention. Behind him, in the doorway, Maya saw other figures appearing. The SEALs from Wolfpack 6, all of them, crowding into her small hospital room with expressions that ranged from solemn to genuinely moved. "Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez," Mitchell said, his voice carrying the weight of ceremony. "It is my honor to present you with the United States Navy SEAL Trident in recognition of your extraordinary valor, your unwavering dedication to the principle of leave no one behind, and your absolute refusal to accept defeat. You are now and forever one of us." The room erupted in applause. Not the restrained clapping of military formality, but genuine, heartfelt appreciation that filled the small space with warmth. Maya looked at the trident in her lap, at the faces of the men she'd saved, and felt something shift inside her. For 3 years, she'd fought to prove herself. She'd endured the sideways glances, the whispered doubts, the assumption that a woman couldn't possibly do the job she'd been trained for. She'd pushed through skepticism and outright hostility, driven by a need to demonstrate that she belonged. And now, in this moment, surrounded by warriors who'd seen her at her worst and her best, she realized that she'd never needed to prove anything. She just needed to be herself. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling inadequate for the emotion behind them. "All of you, thank you. Thank you, Rodriguez." Mitchell's voice was rough. "For bringing us home." The Air Force Cross ceremony was held 2 weeks later at Joint Base in Antonio Randolph, before a crowd of hundreds. Maya stood at attention in her dress blues, her left arm still in a cast, her chest wrapped tight beneath her uniform jacket, while a general read the citation that detailed her actions on that mountainside. The words were formal, clinical. They talked about gallantry and valor, and extraordinary heroism, and actions above and beyond the call of duty. They described the helicopter crash, the injuries she'd sustained, the 14-kilometer evacuation she'd led through hostile territory. They mentioned Parker and Anderson by name, noting that both had survived their injuries and were expected to make full recoveries. But the words couldn't capture what it felt like. They couldn't convey the smell of burning helicopter fuel, the sound of gunfire echoing off canyon walls, the weight of a 210-pound SEAL draped across her shoulders as she stumbled through the darkness. They couldn't describe the fear, the absolute primal terror of being alone and broken in a place where everyone wanted to kill her. And they couldn't describe the determination, the stubborn, furious refusal to give up that had carried her through the night when every cell in her body was screaming for her to lie down and die. The general pinned the medal on her chest, the Air Force Cross, the silver suspension ribbon bright against her blue uniform, and the crowd erupted in applause. Maya stood rigid, her eyes fixed on a point in the middle distance, her face carefully composed. She could feel her mother's eyes on her, could see her sisters in the front row, their faces wet with tears. This was the moment she dreamed of in some ways, the moment when everyone would know what she was capable of, the moment when the doubts and the skepticism would be silenced forever. But standing there, with the medal on her chest and the applause ringing in her ears, Maya felt only exhaustion. She was tired of fighting, tired of proving herself, tired of being the exception that proved the rule. She wanted to go home. She wanted to sleep in her own bed and eat food that didn't come from a military dining facility and spend time with people who didn't carry weapons as part of their daily routine. She wanted to be normal again, if she'd ever been normal to begin with. The ceremony ended, and people flooded toward her, shaking her hand, congratulating her, asking for photographs. She smiled and nodded and said all the right things, the social routine carried out on autopilot, while her mind drifted somewhere else. Her mother found her during a brief lull, appearing at her elbow with the sudden, silent efficiency that only mothers seem to possess. Mija. Her mother's voice was soft, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. I'm so proud of you. Maya looked at her, really looked, for the first time since the ceremony began, and felt something inside her crack. I was scared, Mama. The words came out barely above a whisper. I was so scared. I know, Mija. I know. Her mother pulled her into a careful hug, mindful of the injuries that were still healing. But you did it anyway. That's what courage is. Not the absence of fear, the choice to act in spite of it. Maya buried her face in her mother's shoulder and let herself cry. For Reeves and Vasquez and Kowalski, who hadn't made it home. For Parker and Anderson, who had. For herself, for the person she'd been before that day, and the person she'd become after. The tears lasted for 2 minutes, maybe 3. When they stopped, Maya straightened, wiped her eyes, and squared her shoulders. There would be more missions, more helicopters, more gunfire, more broken bodies that needed saving. The war in Afghanistan was far from over, and the world was full of other wars waiting to happen. Her skills would be needed again, sooner or later. But for now, for this one moment, she was home. 6 months later, Maya Rodriguez returned to Afghanistan. She'd spent the intervening time in recovery and retraining, rebuilding the strength she'd lost and learning to compensate for the lingering effects of her injuries. The compound fracture in her arm had healed cleanly, thanks to the surgeons at Landstuhl, but the scar tissue limited her range of motion in ways she was still adapting to. The broken ribs had mended, though she still felt them on cold mornings, a dull ache that reminded her of what she'd survived. The concussion had been the slowest to resolve. Headaches, memory problems, difficulty concentrating. The symptoms had persisted for weeks, gradually fading as her brain healed itself. The doctors had cleared her for duty, but they'd warned her that another head injury could be catastrophic. She'd nodded, signed the appropriate forms, and gotten on the plane anyway. But Bagram Airfield looked exactly as she remembered. The same rumble of aircraft engines, the same dust suspended in the air, the same controlled chaos of military operations in a combat zone. But everything felt different now. She walked through the base with a new weight on her shoulders. Not just the Air Force Cross that hung in a shadow box in her barracks room, but the awareness of what she was capable of. Senior Master Sergeant Davis met her at the TOC, his face breaking into a genuine smile when he saw her. Rodriguez, welcome back. Good to be back, Senior. And she meant it. For all the trauma, for all the pain, this was where she belonged. This was the work she'd been born to do. We've got a new crew for you, Davis said, leading her to the familiar maze of equipment and personnel. Good people. They've heard the stories, of course. Everyone has. Try not to let them hero worship you too much. It's bad for discipline. Maya almost laughed. I'll do my best. And Rodriguez? Davis paused, turned to face her with an expression that was suddenly serious. Whatever happens out there, whatever missions you fly, whatever situations you find yourself in, remember one thing. What's that? You already proved yourself. You don't have anything left to prove to anyone. Not to me, not to command, not to anyone who doubts whether a woman can do this job. His eyes were intense, almost fierce. So stop trying to prove things. Just be the PJ you already are. That's enough. More than enough. Maya held his gaze for a long moment, processing the words, letting them settle into her consciousness alongside all the other lessons she'd learned over the past 6 months. He was right. She knew he was right. The need to prove herself, to justify her existence in a male-dominated world, had driven her for so long that she'd forgotten there might be another way to live. But standing there, in the place where she'd nearly died and somehow hadn't, she felt that drive beginning to loosen its grip. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. She'd done enough. She was enough. "Thank you, Senior," she said, "for everything." Davis nodded once, then turned back to the business at hand. "Now come on. Your new crew's waiting to meet you, and we've got a mission brief in 30 minutes. Welcome back to the war, Rodriguez." The sun was setting over Bagram as Maya walked toward the flight line, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed too beautiful for a place with so much death and destruction. She thought about the helicopter waiting for her, a new Pave Hawk, painted the same dull gray as the one she crashed in, its rotors tied down against the evening breeze. She thought about Reeves and Vasquez and Kowalski, whose names were now inscribed on the memorial wall she passed every day. She thought about Parker and Anderson, both of whom had recovered fully and returned to their SEAL team, carrying scars that matched her own. She thought about Mitchell and the trident that hung beside her Air Force cross, two symbols of a bond forged in blood and terror, and the absolute refusal to give up. And she thought about the next mission, the one that would come tomorrow, or the day after, or whenever the call went out. There would always be another mission. There would always be someone who needed saving, somewhere that needed a guardian angel. Maya Rodriguez had been declared dead once. She'd come back from that death carrying 2 wounded men across 14 kilometers of hostile terrain, refusing to surrender to the injuries that should have killed her, refusing to accept that the mission was over just because command had written her off. She'd been an outsider, a woman in a world that didn't want her, fighting every day to prove that she belonged. But she'd stopped fighting now, stopped trying to prove anything to anyone. She simply was what she was, a pararescueman, a guardian angel, a warrior who would go into hell to bring people back. That was enough. More than enough. The Pave Hawk's rotors began to spin as Maya climbed aboard, her medical kit secured beside her, her one good hand gripping the familiar rail. Through the open door, she watched the last rays of sunlight fade from the Afghan sky, replaced by the emerging stars of another desert night. Tomorrow there would be another mission, another valley, another firefight, another chance to save lives or lose them. But tonight, she was here. She was alive. She was ready. And that was all that mattered. Maya Rodriguez's story shows us that true courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the choice to act when everything inside you screams to give up. If this kept you engaged, hit that like button. Tell me in the comments. Could you have kept going with those injuries, or would you have stayed down? Subscribe if you haven't already. More stories like this are coming. Thanks for watching.